So hello, everybody. Welcome to the session where we're going to discuss policy issues on local and state level. We just completed the national and international policy session, and if you're walking there and joining here figuratively, welcome back. And if you're new to this session, welcome again. So in contrast to the previous session where we talked about topics on a national level, this session, we're going to focus more on the local level and state level and look at some of amazing programs that are currently being deployed. So the speakers that we have here, we have 6 speakers, and they're going to talk on various issues, including state level economic impacts of solar, state and local clean energy programs, and topics of community solar, and also ACES's own efforts in zero emission network. So we have about 90 minutes and 6 speakers, so we're going to be moving pretty fast. For convenience, the presenters have pre-recorded the presentation and sent it to us. So the format will be, I will introduce the presenter and we will play the video, but the presenter will be joining us live. So if you have any questions, send it our way and I will ask the presenter the question after the video ends, and then we'll move on to the next presenter. So without further delay, our first speaker, we have Damian Pitt and Rachel Smucker. Damian is a professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, and Rachel works at MDV SIA chapter. Today, they will be talking about their joint study where they looked at the economic impacts of reaching 2.5 gigawatts of solar in Virginia. Margaret, we're ready. Please do the video. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Rachel Smucker and I'm the Virginia Policy and Development Manager for MDV SIA. We are the Regional Solar Trade Association in the DMV area. And today, Damian and I are excited to share about the distributed solar study we completed earlier this spring. Leading up to the 2020 legislative session here in Virginia, a number of MDV SIA members were interested in having a study completed on the economic benefits of DG solar, specifically to use as a legislative tool. So late last year, we approached Damian and his team about this project. Before I share a little bit about how we used this study during the legislative session, I'm going to turn things over to Damian to share a high-level summary of this study and its findings. Damian?
Thank you, Rachel. So I'm Damian Pitt. I'm an associate professor and the chair of the urban planning program at Virginia Commonwealth University. I did this research on behalf of MDV SIA with my colleagues at the Center for Urban and Regional Analysis at VCU. And our project looked at a number of different benefits and a number of different sort of policy issues around distributed solar in Virginia. And what I'm going to present today is the part that is probably the biggest and most important part of that study, which was the economic impact analysis. So it was actually 2 different economic impact analyses. One looking at the current state of the distributed solar energy in Virginia, which to this point we've installed about 95 megawatts, and the total distributed solar industry is, according to our estimates, employing around 3,200 people directly. The second phase of the analysis was to look at the potential future economic impact if we were to achieve the policy target of increasing the DG solar capacity by 2,500 new megawatts. And the analysis was conducted primarily in MPlan, which is the software that is used for a lot of.
Stephen, I think we can hear you breathing, so would you mind muting yourself?
I'm trying, yeah, trying, sorry.
No worries.
Types of studies, and what that allows us to do is to look at the direct economic impacts, which are associated with wages and other spending directly in the industry that's being analyzed. And then look at indirect impacts associated with wages and other spending in the supply chain or sort of affiliated industries that are working together with, in this case, DG Solar. And then finally, the what's called induced impacts, which is the spin-off economic effects of workers in those direct and indirect industries spending their money from their wages on goods and services in their communities. So our analysis of the current industry started with the data from the Solar Job Census report that many of you are probably familiar with, the most recent of which showed that the industry today and the DG industry in Virginia the solar industry has about 4,500 total jobs in Virginia, 3,500 of which are in installation. We then reference national data, which shows that about 81% of all installation jobs in the U.S. are in the residential commercial sector, so DG. And so then we did the multiplication there to calculate about 2,800 estimated installation jobs for DG solar in Virginia, and then did some additional analysis and used some assumptions related to these other sectors of the DG industry. For example, we didn't account for any manufacturing jobs, given that we don't see there as being that being a significant industry in Virginia at this time. We also ramped down the wholesale trade and distribution and administrative jobs to a certain degree, and as a result ended up with this estimate of a little over 3,200 total direct jobs in the industry currently. So then integrating that data into M-Plan, we get to the numbers that you see here, and so that's those 3,200 direct jobs have produce a total labor income of a little over 200 million, which adds up to nearly 500 million in direct economic impact. When we look at those indirect and induced jobs and those impacts, that brings the total number of jobs up to 5,168, and the total labor income for all those types of jobs to over 300 million, and over 800 million of total economic impact. Looking then at the second phase of analysis for the future potential impacts, this analysis is based on the investment in those 2,500 megawatts of DG solar, the installation costs, and calculating the numbers from there. And we based that initial investment analysis on a weighted average price of a little over $240 per watt, which was based on, again, it's a weighted average based on an assumption of a certain number of megawatts of residential, commercial, small commercial, large commercial, and community solar, each of which had a different assumed price point, and the weighted average is what you see there. The total, the output, the result of this analysis was almost 29,500 direct jobs in the DG solar industry if we hit that target, for over 4.3 billion in direct economic impact. And as you see here, adding in the indirect and induced impacts, it was over 47,000 jobs and a total economic impact of over $7 billion. So those are numbers that we passed. Oh, sorry, the one additional piece of this is that we looked at the types of jobs within each of those sectors. So sectors that would correspond to the direct jobs in the solar industry, as well as the types of sectors of jobs that are supported through those indirect and induced effects. And for example, you see in the induced jobs, we're talking about jobs at restaurants and real estate agencies and hospitals, where people who work in these direct and indirect industries are spending the money from their wages. So I'll pass it back off to Rachel now to talk about how NDVC was able to use these numbers in their work.
Thanks, Damian. So like I mentioned before, leading up to the 2020 legislative session here in Virginia, we had a number of members raise their hand saying that there was strong interest in having a study conducted like this to leverage during our legislative session. So our company partners, which you can see up here on the screen, alongside the association at large and our communications firm, Gentry Law, were critical to raising the dollars to fund this study, as well as pushing the findings out to our legislators and media outlets. Next slide. Perfect. So as you can see, we had a number of outlets pick up our presser, which was really helpful in amplifying the study's findings and pushing this out onto a larger platform. We armed our patrons and other legislators, as well as reporters and other external stakeholders, with the top line numbers Damian spoke about earlier, and created a few one-pagers, which you can see here, that we utilize heavily during session, including on our Solar Lobby Day. Ultimately, we were fortunate to pass the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which includes a number of rooftop solar provisions that expand the market potential for DG by removing policy roadblocks that have really historically held back this segment of the market. This study was extremely helpful and beneficial to the industry to really articulate how critical the DG provisions were within the VCEA, and specifically in creating local jobs and boosting the local and state economic development. We are extremely grateful for the outstanding work that Damian and his team did on this study, and would definitely encourage others to consider leveraging tools like this in the legislative and regulatory spheres, especially as y'all are thinking about policy development.
Thank you, Damian and Rachel. My question for you.
So thank you for listening to this session, and we appreciate that.
Oh, perfect. So Damian, my question for you, I think it's like a no-brainer that, solar creates jobs and economic growth. But while you were doing this study, were there any things that like you didn't expect that you found, or were you like anything that surprised you about the solar job, like during this study?
Yeah, I would say just, overall, the numbers that we came up with were, more than I would have expected. This is the first study of this nature that I've done, and really a lot of the heavy lifting on.
Oh, I think we just lost you. So can you try again? Oh, looks like we lost you, but we'll get back to you again. Rachel, I have a question for you. So in terms of this 2.5 gigawatt goal, what sense, do you have a sense how much would this be small scale renewable energy projects versus utility scale projects? And how has Dominion Energy's reaction been towards this push for renewable energy?
Yeah, so the 2.5 gigawatts that we use for this study is actually all DG. We're hoping to see that deployment over the next 10 years, and that would include residential, commercial scale, community solar as well. We would anticipate that a bulk of those megawatts would come from commercial scale and community solar, with a smaller segment being fulfilled by residential solar. And to your latter point, like I mentioned in the presentation, the VCEA includes a number of DG provisions that really create a longer runway for the DG market here in Virginia, including increasing the net metering cap, including increasing the PPA, the power purchase agreement program that's been established for a number of years here in Virginia. Those are provisions that all stakeholders involved in the development of the VCEA agreed to, including Dominion. So I think it's safe to say that there is ample opportunity for distributed generation deployment in Virginia.
Thank you. That's really great to hear. Let's get back to Damian again. You were saying about the unexpected results from the study, or some of the surprises?
Yeah, I'm back now. Yeah, I would just say it's the overall. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, just the overall potential impact. I knew it would be high, but when my colleagues came up with the number of $7 billion of potential economic impact if this 2.5 gigawatt DG target were to be hit, that was really eye-opening to me. The other thing that I would say was eye-opening was just how there's a lot of studies that have been done on this topic of trying to quantify the economic impact of solar in different ways, and as with any other type of quantitative analysis, there's a lot of assumptions that go into that. And in the efforts of trying to compare our results to those of similar studies from, like, say, Maryland and other places, it really struck me just how wide of a range of results we were finding, and a wide range of different types of, small changes in assumptions produce pretty hugely different results. And so I see Gilbert nodding. He and I have been talking about this, about the need for some meta-analysis to compare the different studies and to see if we were to normalize them to try to create some consistency. What would the numbers be, and how would those numbers compare from place to place?
Okay, thanks so much, Damian. Thank you so much. Now we're gonna move on to our third speaker. Our third speaker is Laura Rigell, and she's from Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. She is a program manager at the Philadelphia Energy Authority, and she has always also been actively involved with ACES. Today, she will be talking about various solar efforts going in Philadelphia. Thank you. Margaret, will you please play our video?
Hi, I'm Laura Rigell. I'm the solar manager at the Philadelphia Energy Authority and also on the board of ACES. Really excited to be sharing with you today about how here in Philadelphia, we've become one of the fastest growing solar markets in the country, despite the lack of state incentives. I'll start by sharing some background on the Philadelphia Energy Authority, my office. PEA was established in 2010 to advise the city of Philadelphia on issues of energy affordability and sustainability. As an independent municipal authority, we have more flexibility to implement programs and get at some of the issues that are facing our city. Now more than ever, we know that public health and economic development are critical issues for residents of Philadelphia, and we see clean energy as a tool to impact those exact issues. In 2016, we created the Philadelphia Energy Campaign. This campaign was launched with the leadership of City Council President Darrell Clark, with the goal of creating 10,000 jobs over 10 years. The Energy Campaign aims to support an investment of $1 billion across 4 sectors: city buildings, schools, low and moderate income residential, and small businesses. We have active programs now running in all 4 of these sectors, and over the first 2 years of the campaign, we invested over $100 million in projects and created nearly 1,000 jobs. Many of these projects are self-funding, meaning that they pay for themselves over time out of the savings that are achieved. One of the programs I want to highlight is the Adams Solar Project. This is the largest municipal solar purchase in the country to date. The city of Philadelphia will be buying 22% of power needed to supply municipal buildings from this array that will be built in rural Pennsylvania. The 80 megawatt array will be developed by Community Energy in partnership with NG, and we have a partnership with them around economic development, ensuring that Philadelphia residents are able to receive training on the site of the installation. This is all part of the City of Philadelphia's goal of achieving 100% renewable energy for city buildings by 2035. Here in Pennsylvania, our solar carve-out in the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standard is only 0.5%, and we've pretty much met it already. We're lucky, though, to have a very supportive city council and mayor here in Philly, and there was a robust set of legislation passed in 2019 that supports the advancement of solar here in Philadelphia. The first one I'll mention is the Philadelphia Solar Rebate. City Council came to us and asked how they could support the growth of solar in the city, and we supported them in coming up with the solar rebate. This provides a 10 cents a watt rebate for commercial projects and 20 cents a watt for residential projects. My office is actually administering this program on behalf of the city. The city also amended legislation to allow solar canopies by right. Many of these projects were having to go for zoning variances, which was adding significant soft costs to these projects. many homeowners in Philadelphia have roof decks or equipment on their roof. That means a solar canopy is critical if they are to move forward with an installation at their site. We also cut down soft cost by looking at the building permit fee structure here in Philadelphia. We were supporting one specific commercial solar project to happen on a building that would house the city archives. And in the process of supporting that project, noted that the building permit fee for the project was in excess of $30,000. We went to L&I and explained that this was on top of the electrical permit fee and felt it was out of line with the amount of time L&I was actually spending reviewing the project. And we were able to have an agreement of capping building permit fees for solar projects at $200. We also sought two broader sweeping clean energy legislation in 2019. One was the Building Energy Performance Program, which requires retrocommissioning of commercial properties, and Philadelphia also enabled the CPACE program, which my office is administering for Philadelphia. One of our main programs in solar here in Philadelphia is Solarize Philly. We kicked off Solarize Philly in 2017 as part of the Department of Energy's Solar in Your Community Challenge. We launched Solarize Philly really because we knew solar had come down so significantly in price, but we weren't seeing the adoption here in Philadelphia. When we did the math, we saw that if you took out a 15 or 20-year loan for solar here in Philadelphia, your loan payment on a monthly basis could be the same or even less than your electric bill. While most people thought of solar as a luxury option, finally the costs had come down so that it's accessible for the majority of homeowners here in Philly. We wanted to get the word out about that. And we also knew that solar companies in the Philadelphia region and Pennsylvania more broadly were hesitant to do work in Philadelphia because of the reputation of working with L&I being a challenge to get permits, as well as PICO for interconnection. Both L&I and PICO had made strides and have continued to make strides since 2017 to cut soft cost for solar adoption here in Philly. So we wanted to also get the word out about those steps to the industry in the region. To date, we've run 3 rounds of Solarize Philly. We actually just reopened for phase 4, and together these rounds make Solarize Philly the largest single Solarize initiative in the country. In total, our participants have invested $10 million in our local solar market. That's 654 people who have signed contracts at a discount through the Solarize program. And our installers that are participating in the program have added 94 new jobs as a result of their participation. In 2019, we scaled up our outreach efforts to declare August 12th through 18th Philadelphia Solar Week. That week we had a banner on City Hall, and we also did a number of events throughout the city inviting homeowners to sign up for a free solar assessment through the Solarize Philly program. One of those events was our participation in the National Solar Tour. You'll see we have many enthusiastic previous Solarize participants that are now eager to engage with their neighbors to educate them about the value of solar. Now I want to shift over to another of our solar programs that is a direct result of Solarize Philly. When we kicked off Solarize Philly in 2017, we had a number of conversations with representatives from the local solar industry. One of the concerns they voiced was the lack of trained applicants that were applying for open positions. Philadelphia actually has solar installer listed as a high priority occupation based on high employer demand for solar workers. And we know it's the fastest growing occupation in the United States. With all of that in mind, we sat down with the School District of Philadelphia as we were kicking off Solarize Philly to think about how we could train Philadelphia's young people for solar jobs. Since then, we have trained 70 high school students in the basics of solar installation, and in 2018 we were selected for a $1.25 million Department of Energy award to scale up the program. Through Bright Solar Futures, we are kicking off the first high school vocational solar program in Pennsylvania. With 1,080 hours of curriculum, this is the most robust solar training program ever offered to high schoolers in the United States. The program will kick off this fall with the first class of 10th graders. We see this as an opportunity to provide a career pathway for young Philadelphians who may not have many other options in front of them. Solar provides a living wage job and does not require a college degree. We have a parallel pathway for opportunity youth, young adults not engaged in school or employment between the ages of 18 and 30, and are currently placing our first class of graduates into jobs and internships in the solar industry right now. You can feel free to get in touch with me with any questions. My contact information is here on the screen, and I look forward to the question and answers later on in the session.
Thank you, Laura. Certainly very glad to hear the efforts in Philadelphia and how Philadelphia is leading in terms of mobilizing more solar in its effort, solar in the city. You mentioned a lot about Solarize campaign. Would you be able to talk a little bit about what a Solarize campaign is and how can someone create such an effort in their city or neighborhood?
Yeah, of course. So Solarize is not new. Of course, it's been done in hundreds of communities across the United States as a group buying initiative where a nonprofit or a government agency basically supports a group of homeowners to go solar together to get the costs down. So typically, the organizer of the campaign runs a public procurement process to select an installer who's willing to offer below market rate pricing to participants in this campaign, and then sets a deadline. And so anyone who signs a contract by that deadline is able to access the pricing discounts. So it really helps shorten the solar sales cycle and has been incredibly successful here in Philadelphia. I'll say that one additional benefit of the Solarize model is that we actually are able to take a program fee from each of the projects that goes through the group buying program. And those participants are still able to get below market rate pricing even with that program fee taken out of the project because of the significant discounts we could achieve. And so far we've generated over $400,000 in revenue from the program over the past 3 phases. And then we're using that revenue to support our job training program, as well as an offering for low and moderate income households. So I know I didn't mention that in my presentation, but we're actually kicking it off with a pilot cohort of 43 households right now, who are below 80% AMI, to offer a combination of grants and financing so that they can go solar at no upfront cost and start saving from year 1. We've looked at models around the country like Posigen and what's been happening in Baltimore as inspiration for that low-income program, but we've been able to do it thanks to revenue from our Solarize campaign.
Thank you, Laura. I want to bring some of the stuff that David talked about in his presentation about resiliency and how Maryland has been so much focused on resiliency. Has Pennsylvania or Philadelphia considered resiliency as a part of its program?
Yeah, definitely. So resilience is a priority under the Mayor's Office of Sustainability, which we work with very closely. They do a lot of the climate planning on behalf of the city, and they're actually looking to hire a chief resiliency officer that's being negotiated right now as part of the municipal budgeting process. But we are feeling very optimistic about having an increased focus on resiliency. They've been doing heat planning, for example, so putting together cooling centers in some parts of the city where we know that there's significant temperature differences. I think it's like over 20 degrees difference in certain parts of the city, like lower income neighborhoods compared to higher income neighborhoods that have more trees and shading. So it's a big deal, and we know that resilience is going to be an important part of the conversation moving forward.
And maybe Rachel, would you be able to add some of MDVC's efforts in resiliency? Is that something that you guys are looking at?
Yeah, definitely. This isn't something that we have necessarily prioritized in past legislative sessions, but I think moving forward, there's definitely a great need to establish more resiliency hubs in the region. And we're grateful for the work that MEA and David is doing in his office. So certainly moving forward, we hope to see more resiliency hubs in the DMV area.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. So let's move on to our fourth speaker. Our fourth speaker is Stephen Smiley. Stephen is an energy economist and has been working on energy efficiency and clean energy since 1980s. Today, he is here to discuss what policies and framework that a Traverse City could do to reach 100% renewable energy in 10 years. Margaret, would you please play Stephen's presentation, please? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Steve Smiley, and this is my 100% renewable energy plan for Emerald City. Economists, when conducting analysis or writing policy, should state their foundational and political economic principles relevant to their study.
Sorry about that. Did it just freeze?
It's frozen on my end.
Can you try it again? Sorry about that.
Green bonds, green banks, and on-bill utility financing, the capital bottleneck will be removed, releasing the tremendous latent demand by local citizens of all income levels and the muni for clean energy. I project new wind and solar generation should be roughly 3 times the present electric consumption and 3 times the peak. There should be unlimited solar net metering, and I calculate that the impacts on the utility revenues would be less than 1%. I propose flexible and targeted carbon fees, negative at off-peak and positive on-peak for net positive carbon fees, with the off-peak pricing set to drive out natural gas. Combined heat and power quick response biogas engines, enough to run the city on average, are proposed as a backup in the event of grid failures. Electric battery storage and EVs will be phased in with incentives and low-cost time of use rates. Grid modernization will include retrofitting distribution substations for bidirectional control and roughly 100 MVA of renewable energy substations, integrating thousands of electric hot water and other thermal storage units, utilizing grid harmonization as illustrated in the chart to the right by Charlie Grunwald's plan called Link and Sync. Energy costs will be lower than present and fixed indefinitely. Traverse City, Michigan is at 44 degrees north latitude in a humid continental climate. Solar resources 1,350 kilowatt hours per square meter per year, and the wind resources IEC Class 3 on surrounding hills. It's not that windy or that sunny, but we have the advantage that it's twice as sunny in the summer and twice as windy in the winter, providing a nice balance of the renewable resources. Biomass and biofuel feedstocks are available. The city's present energy supply is 93% coal and natural gas. Electric consumption is 310 million kilowatt hours, and as many well-run municipal utilities, cost of electricity is very affordable at 11 cents per kilowatt hour. The annual electric and gas expense is $55 million per year. It's important to note the distinctions based on customer breakdowns. It's typical with most utilities. 87% of the metered customers are residential. However, 80% of the revenues are non-residential. This means that there has to be significant focus on industrial and commercial customers. The summer peak load, the annual peak load occurs in the summer on a hot July or August day at 70 megawatts. The base load throughout the entire year is roughly around 25 megawatts. The graph on the lower right shows in the gray line the excess typical capacity during a winter night. We see that it's as much as 55 megawatts. And this raises a question, to me is, can we heat the city with that excess capacity, in this case 55 megawatts, on a cold winter night with electricity? My conclusion is yes, in particular with the benefit of heat pumps, whether they're geothermal, water source, or heat source heat pumps. But even for most of the time, simple electric resistance heat can heat the city during these off-peak periods. It's critical to start pushing solar energy from the inside out, and with my proposal to remove all limits on solar net metering, the net effect of the utility revenues would be less than 1%. And we should provide long-term on-bill financing for solar, rebates, and no added monthly fees. Provide long-term secure contracts. Community and cooperative solar is critical for the plan because larger scale solar is more cost effective, and it provides the utility the basis for targeting the locations of the systems to balance citywide solar loads. A variable carbon fee is one of the most unique parts of my plan, and this is to have a negative carbon fee on off-peak rates to push the price of electricity 4 cents or less per kilowatt hour to outcompete natural gas for space and water heating, and then have a higher on-peak fee, say of 2 cents per kilowatt hour, and generating, on balance, positive net revenues from carbon fees. On-bill financing should be expanded to include solar storage, fuel switching, EV charging, and controls, with no qualifications other than an electric bill, no credit check, so the program can be beneficial for low-income citizens. Rebates, which have been applied by most utilities, should stay in place, but be expanded for solar, storage, fuel switching, demand controls, and electric vehicles. I propose to ban or eliminate new natural gas connections. And in any event, aging gas lines are leaking and dangerous and must be abandoned for safety reasons. But most critically, I want the electricity to be priced off-peak to outcompete natural gas so that natural gas will be phased out based on simple market conditions. I project we'll need about 28 turbines, just 1 to 4 per surrounding townships.
Oh, looks like we're breaking it again. Maybe we can just pause this now and we can circle back, because I think Stephen is not here. So when he comes back, we can probably ask him questions. Sorry about that. I don't see Stephen here. So when he comes back, we'll probably just start and ask him questions. So Margaret, I think we can just move on to our 5th speaker here. And for our 5th speaker, we have Gilbert Michaud. Gilbert is a professor of public policy at Ohio University. His research focuses on renewable energy policy, utility regulation, and economic development. Today, he'll be talking about his research findings about the factors that, that promote community solar and generally about his research in community solar. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gilbert Michaud. I am a faculty member at the Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Affairs at Ohio University. Here today to present on community solar. Title of my presentation is, what are the characteristics of U.S. states with high rates of community solar deployed? And so as an introduction, again, this presentation focuses on community solar, which is basically a way to increase market access to folks who otherwise couldn't go solar due to roof orientation, condo owners that have HOAs, shading, other types of challenges. Allows them typically to invest and subscribe to an off-site shared solar array and share the costs and benefits of ownership in that. Like traditional sort of rooftop PV, community solar has been increasing over the past decade or so with regard to deployment. Lower costs, higher megawatts installed. However, there's been sort of a general lack of research on the drivers and barriers of community solar. There's been a lot of studies done, including my own, on the drivers of distributed rooftop solar, but not so much in the community solar realm because it's in its relative infancy compared to, I guess, traditional solar. And so I've been thinking a little bit more about, what are some of the drivers of community solar? Do they relate to some of the same types of variables that we're seeing in the literature for rooftop solar? And so real quick here, on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a sort of depiction again of this off-site shared solar array where home or business owners can subscribe to, and then they get utility bill credits accordingly. There's a lot of different models, but this is sort of a traditional community solar, which brings forth a lot of different positive attributes, economies of scale, ideal project locations near substations, perhaps, and on down the line. There have been 19 states that have formally adopted community solar enabling legislation or policy, as you can see on the map here to the right-hand side. And then many other states that have actually been doing projects independent of central legislation, which is of interest. I would term this as perhaps, loophole or quasi-community solar, nonprofits doing, crowdfunding programs or electric co-ops doing programs, innovative ways to do community solar without, central community or virtual net metering type legislation. That being said, most of the megawatts deployed have been in states with policy. If you look to the graphic on the left-hand side, Minnesota, Massachusetts, Colorado, California, places that have policy and good policy that have been deploying a lot of these projects so far. But again, on the map, you can see that not all projects are in states that have policy formally. And one quick reminder about policy is that policy, by all means, is not uniform. It has a lot of different sort of provisions and metrics with regard to program and project size caps, subscriber eligibility and compensation, and many other things as you see on this table here. Okay, so to my research and sort of its unique contributions, again, if you think back to a couple slides ago when you saw that map of Minnesota, Massachusetts, and those states, that seems pretty obvious without actually running any models and looking at the data quite yet, that policy does seem to be an important driver of community solar deployment. But I've been starting to think about, what are these other factors, these non-policy factors, education, income, voting behaviors, et cetera, that might be driving community solar specifically. The unit of observation and focus here is at the state level for the reasons that you see below. Okay, so last summer in June of 2019, NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, for the first time ever, operationalized and publicly made available a new data set that basically showed the total community solar output in kilowatts or megawatts, I suppose, by US state, which was novel and interesting. And so using that data set and using a variety of other types of sources, which I'll share on the next slide, what I've sort of done thus far is set up, just dipping my toes into the water here, sort of preliminary work, cross-sectional data basically from 1 year, so from 2019, last year, and then 51 different observations. So again, at the state level, 50 states plus DC, N equals 51. I basically set up two models thus far, two regression models. One that looks at adoption of community solar by state, and then one that looks specifically at legislation or policy. And so real quick, here are the summary statistics or descriptives. You can see on the top left-hand corner, community solar adoption and community solar legislation as sort of the two the dependent variables measured on a sort of dichotomous dummy variable type fashion from a 0 to 1. So 0 if a state for instance, doesn't have policy, and it gathers a value of 1 if it does have policy. Again, that's from the NREL data set. Solar insolation, working our way down to our independent variables, basically being a measurement of the sun area in a state. Electricity costs perhaps being important as the price that someone might otherwise pay for electricity. Income, educational attainment. Partisan lean is an interesting variable. This is in essence the average difference, as you see in the measurement column, between how a state votes and how the country votes overall. This is sort of a scale of Republican to Democrat, trying to understand voting patterns and behavior, and then population. Again, you can see the measurements and the sources on the right-hand side of the screen. So again, set up 2 different models. The first is looking at community solar adoption. This is basically, binomial regression model, this linear probability model, with adoption 1, 0 being on the left-hand side of the equal sign, and then all of these independent variables that you saw on the prior slide being on the right-hand side of the equation, trying to assess the importance of these things as it relates to adoption specifically. Not megawatts adopted, but just adoption period. I had set up some models with the continuous megawatt variable, but haven't really been able to get that to work properly quite yet. And then the next model is focused again on policy or legislation very specifically. Again, set up with the same independent variables. So here's sort of the preliminary results. You can see 2 different models shown here, as you saw in the prior slides. The first, model 1, being down the center of your screen, focused on adoption specifically, and then legislation on the right-hand side in model 2. And a few interesting observations. Partisan lean, for instance, pops up as statistically significant and meaningful across both variables, which is a strong indicator, basically showing to us that states that are a little bit more progressive and traditionally vote Democratic in elections are more apt to not only adopt legislation, but to deploy more community solar projects. Perhaps unsurprising, but it's always nice to confirm quantitatively what we might have hypothesized regardless. A few other things, we don't see too many other variables pop up as significant here. See electricity cost pop up at the 99% level, which is great, albeit with a negative sign, which is not what one might think. It seems to be that there's some endogeneity and multicollinearity and some challenges with some of the variables. Again, a low number of observations as well. But I would like to point out your adjusted R squared across the bottom row there is 0.338 in model 1, and actually pretty good in the second model at 0.625. This is basically a measurement explaining the variance that we're seeing. So a lot of the variables that I'm including in this model are actually doing a good job, almost 2/3 showing what these things are impacting in terms of legislation. Acknowledging the fact that the dependent variables themselves might have some sort of interaction with one another. What I did next is set up sort of the simultaneous equations of seemingly unrelated regression models. At the top, the first one, you can see legislation. Knowing that partisan lean was an important factor, ran that again, got 99% significance across both models, which is really good confirmation. And again, knowing that something like legislation would impact adoption itself, ran the model at the bottom, found that that was also very significant and meaningful variable. And then I ran a model with population and a model without population on the right-hand side in SUR2. And you can see population pop up here as an important driver, basically through the lens of states that have more people, have more nonprofits, have more utilities. They're doing projects outside of legislation, as it were anyway. So to wrap up, it's cliche, but true, this is very preliminary work. Partisan lean seems to be a really important driver. A lot of projects, I think, are happening outside of policy, as you're seeing in some of these states that maybe have higher education or more people. And this might be a stimulus to implement policy down the road. And that's sort of what I'm trying to get at here. And moving forward, I think trying to integrate the role of pioneering innovative utilities, understanding the role of consumer demand, increasing the number of observations over time, I think will be important strategies. So my email address is at the bottom of the screen. Please email me if you have any questions, and thanks for listening.
Thank you, Gilbert. Thank you for your presentation, Community Solar. The topic of community solar is pretty near and dear to me. When I was in North Carolina, I supported building small-scale solar storage community solar projects, and moving in Florida at FPL, we've been able to build more than we're building 1.5 gigawatts of community solar in the next couple of years. So pretty incredible growth in community solar. And thank you for your presentation. Really helps putting numbers on these factors, same as Damian's presentation. My question to you is, while reviewing community solar policies, did you find any good community solar projects that you were impressed by, or perhaps, and also projects that you really didn't think it was a really good program?
Yeah, it's a good question. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. And thanks for listening to my presentation. As I noted in my slides and my talk, I was really just measuring community solar policy as this dichotomous, yes, you have it, no, you don't have it kind of way. I've been trying to think about a better way to operationalize, you saw on slide 4 in my slide deck, you know, the different program and project size caps and LMI provisions and different things to like say that one state's policy is better than another's in essence. So I haven't done too much digging, or at least in terms of the model that you saw, like trying to figure out a way to better measure policy across states. And it is not uniform, as I mentioned. I would say that Massachusetts and Minnesota sort of pop out as states that have good policy and a lot of community solar. Folks probably know that Minnesota is sort of the poster child for like community solar at this point, 600 plus megawatts deployed. Utilities such as Excel and a lot of the co-ops that are doing a ton of projects. I'd also caveat that with the fact that, and I've been looking at these numbers pretty regularly, in terms of their subscriptions, it's like 85 to 90% C&I, commercial and industrial. So it's not really targeting, it's not really hitting residential and LMI populations, which is kind of unfortunate. So I think making sure that we're actually targeting residential folks who otherwise couldn't do it for the reasons that we all know, and also including LMI, I think is like a really important strategy if we think of like what community solar programs might work best, or policies rather. Colorado, I believe, has LMI provisions, as do other states. And then in terms of program, just super quick, you know, I think we're seeing co-ops in some states do projects. Bark Electric Co-op in Virginia was one of the first to do community solar. I got a lot of positive press for it. A lot of other co-ops are doing community solar. In Athens, Ohio, where my university is located, we did this community-based type solar, basically a partial carbon fee kind of project where our community choice aggregation entity implemented a partial voluntary fee for folks to sort of submit into this pool of funds to deploy community solar in the city of Athens, Ohio, which was a pretty interesting and kind of novel model as well. And I have a peer-reviewed paper on that as well if folks are interested in. So we're seeing co-ops, we're seeing different states do different things, and then we're seeing sort of nonprofits and utilities and CCAs and other types of entities figuring out innovative ways to do community solar.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you so much. I want to pull in Rachel, Damian, and perhaps even Laura. Like looking at Michael's presentation, Gilbert's presentation, do you have any thoughts in terms of community solar and how that's expanding in your regions? Laura, why don't you go first?
Sure, I can jump in. Yeah, it's not enabled in Pennsylvania, unfortunately. So that's in the works. They've been pressing for it, the advocates and industry, to allow community solar in Pennsylvania. And we've seen some nonprofits looking to create creative alternatives, but it's really challenging in the absence of virtual net metering to make it work, basically. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Rachel, do you have any thoughts on the MDV region?
Yeah, here in Virginia, we have actually two programs. There's a community solar program that was established a number of years ago where the utility would own and operate the system. This year, this past legislative session, we passed legislation for a shared solar program that is that allows third-party ownership of the system. And that is a pilot program for, I believe, 150 megawatts of solar. So a smaller pilot program, but one that we hope will eventually become permanent and, of course, expanded. You're muted, Achyut.
Yeah, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. We got a question from Teresa Baker here about community solar. A lot of states have aggressive renewable energy goals. How much of community solar is helping to reach these goals, and where do you think they can help more? Maybe Gilbert and Rachel, do you think you have answers to this one? Do you have any thoughts on this one, if you looked at it?
Yeah, just real quick. So a lot of states have what's called an RPS, a renewable portfolio standard, basically a certain percentage of an electric utilities, a regulated electric utility, usually the IOUs, generation mix to come from renewables. And that's something I need to think about in my models as well, I think, in terms of, are there interactions between other types of policy mechanisms, RPS, net metering, policies geared toward distributed solar deployment that might be sort of interacting with community solar as well? That's maybe not answering the question, but it's something I've been thinking about, trying to understand, you know, if folks have conducive policies to go solar and they live in states where there's high electricity costs or other types of things, they maybe have a decision to, subscribe to community solar or maybe just do rooftop solar themselves. So that's something else I think I probably need to think about moving forward.
Rachel, do you have thoughts on that, or?
Yeah.
Because we're running out of time, so.
Sure. Well, I'll just say both of our community solar programs are capped at a limited amount. So in terms of how much it will play in the RPS space in Virginia, those amounts are going to be limited. But like I said, I think in future years, I'm hoping that those programs will be expanded so that they'll play a larger role within our renewable energy generation.
Thank you, Rachel. So let's move on to our final. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to add one thing that big variable here is the utility support and marketing. So it's one thing to say that a given state like Virginia has enabled community solar or even required utilities to provide community solar. It's quite another to see that actually the follow through to actually put that make that happen and to advertise in a way to make it available and appealing to customers. And I think that that's been an issue here in Virginia where we have quote unquote had this community solar for a long time, but it actually still doesn't exist as far as I know, or if it certainly has not, there hasn't been a lot of energy put into developing that program and rolling it out on the part of the utility. And I'm a little worried about, hopefully, that was why there was a need for this new terminology of shared solar to try to achieve what it is that we actually want in terms of what I think most people are picturing when they talk about community solar, and hopefully that'll be able to happen and won't be slowed down in the way that this previous program has.
Thank you, Damian. Thank you so much. So let's move on to our final presentation. For our final presenter, we have Sarah, Towns, Telly, and Rahim doing a presentation together, talking about ACES Zero Emission Network Program. Sarah is a very passionate and incredible leader, and also serves as a board member in ACES. Telly is a student researcher at UC Boulder, and Rahim is a professor at University of Pacific. Let's hear about what they've been doing in Zero Emission Network. Margaret, when you're ready. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Towns. I'm on staff at ACES, and I'm going to tell you the story of how we started this of 2018. I was new to ACES. I've been in the arts, teaching singing for 25 years, brand new to the renewable energy movement as a profession. And the message at the conference was clear. The scientific urgency for the need to reduce carbon emissions was extremely well established. The technology to do so and the economic modeling to do so were all very, very well established. What was lacking was public policy and public engagement. In other words, we know what we need to do, we know how urgently we need to do it, we know how to do it, and we're not doing it. And that summarized why I had joined ACES in the first place, because, like many people, full of good intentions, reasonably full of knowledge for a layperson, but still living my life in such a way that I knew I was more part of the problem than of the solution. I wanted to change that. I wanted to be around other people who were changing that. So I made a proposal to the board of directors, which they passed, and in 2019 we started this program called the Zero Emissions Network. The idea is everybody wants to do the right thing, but everybody's just living their lives and most of us aren't doing it. So let's bring it to people. Let's make it easier. How do we do that? Information, money, and mentorship. So we put together with a bunch of fantastic interns, one of whom you'll meet, Pantelli Stibravy, from the CU Environmental Science Program, a website full of knowledge, very simple, easy to follow, how to reduce your carbon footprint. So the information is now there. Money. We applied for a grant. We were able to give out $20,000 in subscriptions to lower income households in Boulder to be a part of Jack Solar Garden, this wonderful regenerative farm and energy CSA going up north of Boulder, so that they could reduce their carbon footprint and be a part of solar energy, even though they're renters or people that typically wouldn't have the money to invest in solar. And mentorship. Now we have this knowledge. We as a team have individually been tracking our own carbon, and we've been tracking the savings, the carbon savings, and we've been tracking the lifestyle benefits that happen when we take these steps. So now we have the real life experience, we're walking the talk, so that we can offer real mentorship. What is mentorship? It's enthusiasm, it's relationship, it's saying, I care about what I do and I care about what you do, and I will help you get from A to B if you share my goal of reducing your carbon footprint. So Telly and a wonderful supporter of ours from Stockton, California, Rahim, Kohie, are going to tell you more of the details of what we've been working on. And I'll just wrap by saying it's been so much fun. It feels so much better to go to bed at night feeling more a part of the solution than of the problem. It brings integrity, brings joy. And here's an example. Here's our team web. Team handshake. Zen Boulder net zero. Zen Boulder net zero. Zen Boulder net zero. Thanks, everybody.
Hello, Solar 2020. My name is Pantelli Stibravy, and I'm one of the many hardworking individuals whose work led to the realization of a zero emissions network in Boulder, Colorado. Without further ado, I'll show you the Zen web pages and how you can reduce your carbon footprint. Starting on the ACES homepage, you can navigate to our site by going to Programs and Zero Emissions Network. This will take you to the Zen homepage, which has a mission statement, it has contact information, and some pictures of our lovely team. The What We Offer page highlights 3 of the most important Zen programs: the microgrant program, the offset program, which is in the works, and the carbon tracking program. Each of these helps individuals to achieve net zero emissions. The How to Reduce Emissions tab seeks to answer 2 basic questions. 1, what are carbon emitting activities? 2, what are carbon reducing activities? Each of these questions is answered with respect to 3 major areas: transportation, home energy, and diet and animal agriculture. The Local Government and Grid page highlights 2 very important institutions in carbon planning and carbon emissions. On this page, you will see goals for these institutions, as well as areas where citizens can become involved. On the last page, titled Solutions, local organizations are highlighted. These organizations help individuals to achieve net zero emissions, and they do that through natural solutions and through innovative solutions. This is just a brief overview of all the great information on the Zen web pages. I hope that this is helpful, and I hope to share this information with more people so that they can all, and we can all, reduce our emissions. I'll now pass it off to Rahim.
Hello everyone, my name is Rahim Kohie, and this is a project which is one of the many components of the Zero Emission Network project. My name is Rahim Kohie, and I'd like to acknowledge the great work of two of my amazing students, Giselle and Grace. Quickly, the emissions in the US was on a declining trend between 2007 and 2017. Unfortunately, in 2018, the emissions, the U.S. emissions actually went up by 2%, which makes it even now more important for us to do everything we can to actually let the public know that what they need to do in order to reduce their carbon footprint. The project is to design and build a carbon dioxide kiosk that displays the local, national, and global levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The system is to be solar powered. It should update itself once every 24 hours and measure and display the carbon dioxide content of the local atmosphere. The displays ought to be visible from 100 yards away, and the system also acquire and display not only national but also global CO2. The system will also have a memory that actually keeps track of how, as time goes on, the CO2, the local CO2 and the national CO2 and the global CO2 is either declining or rising. Quickly, the system takes no input. It is almost autonomous and produces and displays the local CO2, the national CO2, and global CO2, and it has 6 or 7 main modules. The modules involve first, the main components are the CO2 sensor module itself. It requires some filtering as such. The microcontroller module, which receives and processes and displays the data. The display module, which involves not only controlling the display, but also displaying the actual information we are displaying. The power module actually is for getting power and conditioning that power and regulating that power for the microcontroller and the display module. And of course, there would be a Wi-Fi through which we access websites and mostly EIA websites or DOE websites for information on the national and global CO2. And finally, there would be a number of software modules that needs to be developed. For more details of this, please contact me. And in closing, let me just end by saying, according to NOAA, it is time to remove carbon from the atmosphere. Not only we have to stop coal and natural gas and all those stuff, it is time to remove. And it is time to go to people and help them reduce their carbon footprint, which is pretty much planting trees. The beauty of this Zen project is that especially that website allows people to go and learn about their own carbon footprint and the things they can do to remove carbon from the atmosphere. Let me just say just one more thing. Question is, what will history say about us? Will our great-grandchildren say that we were just a bunch of people who burnt everything that we could burn? Or did we really care about the environment and passed on to them a planet that can sustain the level of life that our great-great-grandchildren deserve to have? Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Hi, Rahim. I have a question. So your module seems really interesting. So I was thinking like it would be something like, you know, like you can install it in a city and people can see how much the carbon dioxide has, carbon dioxide is it in their region and how does it compare to like global scale? It could be like a local art installation perhaps. So what is your timeline in terms of when this is going to be completed and how much it would cost to build?
Thank you for your question. It's a very good question. Based on my quick estimate, first of all, what my students have done, Giselle and Grace, is that they have designed and conceptualized the electronics of it. By December, they're going to take their senior design project 2, and by then they will develop the electronics, a prototype for the electronics of it. Now, in terms of something that can be used in Boulder or in other cities, we're talking about something between about $3,000 for the cheapest version to about $7,000. I will think that we can actually come up with even a $5,000 version of it. And again, if you remember, I kind of sent you that little video about what is the actual cost of not doing this rather than doing it, which is a kind of more like a philosophical discussion more than a technical one. So my answer is that we need to actually find people who are willing to support this endeavor and help us build about 20,000 of these and put one in every American cities. That makes it about $100 million. However, the cost of not doing this, if coastal flooding happens, you're talking about $10 trillion.
Yeah.
So it's a very good investment.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Ricky.
Quickly, this is just one single initiative among many, many other amazing initiatives that most people on this panel and in the other sessions are already proposing. So we are just one of the many people who are doing wonderful work. And thanks again for letting me answer this question. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to circle back to Telly. So it seems like you did incredible research. What else did you learn about City of Boulder and some of emission reductions while you were doing your research on this project?
Thank you, Achyut. There was plenty to learn throughout the entirety of this process, and really my role on the team was to examine these interconnected systems between utilities and government and citizens. And so looking at areas where we can work on behalf of the city in their climate plan to engage with citizens and to also work with the utilities and try and see what they're doing and how these relationships can be win-win for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Sarah, final question for you. So thank you for your leadership on this project. And so it seems like this is something that a lot of cities are going to be interested in. I mean, I'm sure Philadelphia, and even parts of Maryland and a lot of other cities, New York, I mean, all these cities are doing lots of efforts and they would want to be connected to you or some kind of, or like, so how do you envision your zero emission network to grow in the future?
Well, that was the idea from the beginning, Achyut, is that we would create a blueprint and that people wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel because 80-something% of the information translates to any city. And so if people wanted to help their citizens in any city, they could just look at our website and our data, juggle a few numbers for their local grid, juggle a few numbers for their, a few different opportunities for their local environment. And in about a week, they could absolutely reproduce what we've done. We would help them, with the grant applications. We would offer them all of our experience, and they could be hitting the ground running pretty fast.
Thank you, Sarah. I think we're 12 minutes past our time, and I think we can wrap up now. That is all for today. I think we've learned a lot today. We heard from speakers about how the solar is how the benefits of economic impacts of solar, learned about what Maryland is doing in terms of innovative programming for developing resiliency in low-income households. We've heard what a city like Philadelphia is doing and what other cities, something like similar to cities like they can do. We've learned more about community solar and more about efforts in reducing our carbon emissions. So hopefully you've learned something today, something new today, and please, if you have any feedbacks, reach out to us, and feel free to connect with the speakers individually as well. It's been a pleasure. Please enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.